Hi, thank you for joining us today. Would you like to introduce yourself and tell us where you're from and where did you grow up?
My name is Meadow. Um, Meadow Sylvester. I grew up in a little shithole town near Bakersfield called Taft. Taft's an acronym for they're all fucking tweakers. Yeah, I didn't go to school with a single black kid from kindergarten to graduation. But Kern County also has the highest conviction rate for the state of California for most of many years. And at 19 years old, I left there because I didn't want to end up in prison just because I like to get high. My mom was a meth cook, so I literally have been around methamphetamines my entire life. Lily, come here. Come here now. Over here. But even though she was doing that and selling shit, I remember when I was like 5 years old, the cops came to do a raid on the house, right? And she made me sit next to her, still very still, and she always had my hair, had long hair, so she kept my hair in a French braid. And so she stuck something up in my French braid. I didn't know what it was. Now I do. You know what I mean? But she had hid her dope up actually in my French braid, up underneath it, because there's a little pocket in her French braid. And so she made me sit really still next to her, and the cops searched the house or whatnot, and they left. And but I never even saw a joint get smoked. It wasn't until I was 13 I started using on my own. And I saw like the dynamic of what was going on at my dealer's house that I was reminded of. This looks really familiar. In a small town, it's 2 stoplights, 1 high school. So I started asking questions, and lo and behold, my mom, like I said, had been selling and doing meth, my whole childhood.
And what would you say was your experience with your parents? Were you kind of close to them, or?
Well, my mom raised me by herself. My dad went on to have other kids, but since he was a drunk, she wouldn't let him near me. I think that's a whole other story. I really have a lot of animosity towards my mom because since my dad passed, because I missed out on so many years with him because he was a drunk. Well, she was a tweaker, so what right did she have to even play? She was just using me as a way to get back at him because he chose drugs over her, she felt. But it was like a revolving door. She'd get a man would move into the house. Within 3 weeks, he'd be beating her ass, and I'd have to call 911. And then, a new one would be back 2 weeks later, same scenario. This had happened like over and over and over again my whole childhood. Until when I was like 9 or so, she met my stepdad, who was, he's the ruination, I think, the downfall of my existence. He joined the Navy without asking her anything about it. I really think that he married her only to get to me. Like my 9th birthday, my 9th birthday present was basically him touching me while she went to the store. And and I told my mom when I was 11, and he had moved us to Virginia at the time, and it was made my choice whether or not we would leave or not, but she reminded me we'd be homeless if she did. So she stayed with him, let her stay with him. 13 years old, we go back to Taft, and a lot of things culminated in me trying to kill myself. And the little girl that came out of that coma was I was a good girl before that, but when I came out of that coma, I was not the same girl. She was angry, you know what I mean? And that's kind of that's what set me down on this road pretty much. I think that the little good girl, she was tired of trying to do good and only getting bad for it, and I'm still kind of that child, never really have grown up past that. And I had my first kid when I was 16. I did good for a while, taking care of him, and then I started using again when I was about 18 with his father. And I didn't want him to grow up the way I did, so I signed guardianship over to his grandparents, thinking that I'd be cleaned up in a few years and go back and get him. Well, that was an abusive relationship. We were together for 5 years before I'd had enough and left. And then I'd be in the same town, like 2 blocks from my kid, and not going and seeing him, because whenever I went and saw him, they'd be putting me down and everything like that. I'd have to deal with the whole rhetoric, you know what I mean? And so I'd avoid going to see him, but I felt like a piece of shit. I'm like 2 blocks away and not going to see him. So I moved to Omaha to try to get my shit together, because that's where my dad lived. And I was like, 19 then? And in Omaha, I learned that people still traveled and followed the dead. You know what I mean? And did stuff like that. There were still hippies out there in the world. So I never really fit in Taft, you know, it's all skinheads and whatnot. And I always felt like an outsider. And I started doing like shows and venues, and then like I ended up leaving there to come to California to do a gathering near Bakersfield, Black Sheep. And Tucson got kicked out of the van for some bullshit. Me trying to protect a young female from, you know, an older man, and he turned her around on me, and so I ended up trying to find some way to hitchhike to California, and I didn't make it to Bakersfield. I actually ended up here in San Francisco. Long story short, you know. And when I came here, I said, you know, first of all, when I first got back in California, it was in Dana Point, and I'm looking in the ocean at low tide to find like rocks and stuff like that. There's shells to make hemp jewelry out of to sell, right? And I've been down and I pick up this quartz geode. It was in the ocean, you know, like ametrine geode in the ocean. And I brought that stone with me up to here, and when I first got here, I was all by myself, and Hippie Hill was packed. You know, there's like 300, 400 people on the hill. And I'm sitting there sitting there against the Janus tree by myself with that little rock. And I was like, here in a few minutes, half that hill's gonna be out down here, and they're gonna be puffing bowls and passing beers.